So I'm going to be working with a colored resin in this video. It's been a long time since I've actually worked with resin, and working with a colored resin, doing some tinting to the epoxy resin. So I ended up doing a scroll piece with a scroll saw, and I have some open spaces. I'm going to try to pour some colored resin in here. There's some things I picked up along the way, some errors I ended up making, some things that that worked out pretty well. So I'm going to try to pass some of that information along to you, as well as giving you a little demonstration with this Keda dye liquid dye kit. Here I just grabbed 2 ounces of the denatured alcohol, and I ended up adding 6 drops of the black. That's going to equal out to be a little bit more than 1/8 teaspoon to 8 ounces. So it's a little bit diluted, and that's the intent that I wanted. I want that bottom piece to end up having some grays to it. Now I'm applying this with just a cotton cloth. You'll see the bigger piece from it. All I did was ended up taking a cotton cloth. It's a low length cloth that I ended up cutting off from a larger towel. And I got a stack of them from online. Anyways, I'm just working this black around. The sanding on that was a 220 grit. It does have a router cut around the edge for a bezel, and I did not sand that bezel. Now this piece here, it's kind of a funny story. This is the second attempt on this, and just to give you guys a little background, you know, when you're doing woodworking videos, especially the color work on it, if one thing goes wrong, you have to start over. I can't tell you guys how many times I've ended up having to just throw away videos that I have a lot of time invested already into it, but my camera stops working, or my card is corrupted, or just some error ends up happening. I spilled dye on the table or something, you know. So with woodworking, you only get one shot, especially with the color work. But interesting story on the backdrop of this is that this is my second attempt with this resin. The first time I must not have measured it out as well as I wanted to, and it started smoking, and it got really hard really fast. Now I know it's been a while since I've worked with epoxy resin. This is a 1-to-1 ratio, so I figured, well, it's gonna be pretty easy. I wanted to mix up 5 ounces of the resin, 2.5 ounces of the resin, 2.5 ounces of the hardener. How difficult can that be? Well, I guess I must have miscalculated something on the first one, and it just it started smoking, and it got really hard really fast, and it even got warm. It got really warm. But you know, I should have saved it, and I should have put it on at the end for you guys to see. But I go to try to pour it, and it just fell right out of the cup in one big block. Anyways, I'm rambling here, but so I'm working with the Keda liquid dyes. I'm gonna be putting 10 drops of this blue liquid dye into this cup, and I'll be adding 1.5 ounces of the epoxy resin that I have mixed up there. Now you can end up adding the dyes to the resin itself and then adding the hardener later, but I wanted to do it the easiest way that I thought it would be, is just to mix up the resin first. I have a smaller piece. I wasn't, you know, panicked for time or anything like that. I thought I had plenty of time to end up mixing up the resin, adding it to the dyes, and then you know, mixing it all up and then pouring it into the small piece that I ended up having. If you have a bigger piece and a time constraint, then you may want to consider actually coloring the resin itself and then adding the hardener later. But that's not what I did in this video. So anyways, the red, I ended up adding 7 drops of that red, and then just 1 drop of the amber yellow. And here I'm adding 1.5 ounces of that epoxy resin to the 10 drops of the blue. I know I went a little heavy on the blue. You know, it really kind of depends upon what you're looking for. It looks really nice with the light coming through the back of it. I think it turned out pretty nice, but you can always go a little bit less, and it turned out a little bit lighter. Anyways, for the red, I ended up going with 2.5 ounces of the resin to the 7 drops of the red, and then I went with 1 ounce of that resin to the 1 drop of the Keda dye amber yellow, because I wanted it to be a lighter, more yellow color versus the amber. And there my phone fell out. There's just a bunch of things that went wrong in this video, so you know, I apologize for that, but you know, hopefully you guys can kind of understand, and maybe some of you guys get a little laugh out of it along the way at my expense. So I poured it back into the softer, more pliable cup. One of the things that's really nice with those little red cups is that it's good for mixing little samples up, especially with dye stain, things like that. But they're not very flexible, and it makes it a little more difficult to end up pouring the actual resin. I like to kind of squeeze the cup to make it a little smaller area where it's being dispensed from, to try to give it a little more control over. But that's just me. You know, you could probably end up doing it, but also the reason that I like to end up bending it is so I can end up having a better view, so I can see a little easier on where I'm pouring it, how it's coming out. You know, just a couple of other variables that I'm looking at, and it just worked out best for me. I'm just mixing these in until, you know, I don't see any streaks of the dye. I just want it to all be even, and just basically making sure that everything is level, making it level so that way when I end up pouring my resin, that it's not going to, you know, come up over the sides of the walls of the cutout. I don't want it to be uneven. You know, just common sense stuff. Another thing I should end up mentioning is that this piece is clamped to a pine board, and I also have wax paper on the back side. Now, there's, I'm sure, a better way of doing this, but this is what I ended up doing. Another pretty important note to keep in mind if you're going to end up doing this is watch your clamps. This top clamp on the top, in the middle, in the center, right above that where I was pouring right there, it ended up, you know, coming in contact with that resin. So when I ended up retracting it, some of the resin ended up coming with it. I thought it was going to be a pretty big deal, but it turned out that it wasn't that big of a deal. But, you know, you just might want to watch your clamps a little closer than what I did on this. And that's the other thing too, is that when you're pouring, you're starting and stopping. You'll end up getting some strings that come off with the resin. So just kind of keep a close watch on that. I'd recommend, you know, having like a popsicle stick or a piece of wood or something where you can, you know, scrape them strings as you're dispensing. Then when you stop and you retract your cup, then you can just take that popsicle stick and then wipe that excess string off so it's not getting onto your actual part. And here you can see that's, I was going to try it with the solo cup, but I just didn't feel as comfortable going as I did with this. I just like it where I can fold that cup a little bit to have a little better control in my dispensing of that colored resin, especially because you only got one shot. You know, I didn't want to have to do this over again. But you know, sometimes those things happen. See there, you can see I just removed one of those strings. And the other thing too is if you do it quick, it seems to help out as well. You know, to prevent it from getting on your piece. Right here, this is what I was talking about, where if you notice up on the right hand side in the center, there was a little bit right there. I wiped that off. I thought it was going to be a bigger deal just because it was dyed. There is a little bit of staining there from the red dye, but because this was black, it didn't make that big of a difference. And then in here, this thing actually worked pretty well. I didn't think it was going to work very good just because the resin's so thick. But it didn't work too bad. It's a little bit of a process. It takes a little bit of a time to to get it out, and then you have to refill it. But it actually worked out pretty well. It's a lot easier than if I tried pouring it in there, I tell you that. Here the resin was starting to harden. So, I had to kind of move along. I ended up taking the torch just to get the bubbles out. Now, in this process, I think what's actually happening is that it's heating the resin up, which thins it out, which allows the bubbles to actually travel to the surface to degas it. Now, I could be completely wrong on that. That's just kind of my theory. If somebody actually knows the chemical breakdown of it or what's really happening is why that ends up degassing and releasing the bubbles, you can leave it in the comments. I really appreciate it. I really try to understand chemical components and what's the actual way things work. I like to know that kind of thing just so I can put more information together for myself. Here when I peeled off that wax paper, you can see that there was quite a bit of transfer. The wax paper didn't release cleanly. So I'm just taking, it's just regular water, and I'm just cleaning that back off. Now here I wasn't very panicked. I knew that I should be having no problems wiping that off. I guess my biggest concern was what kind of damage it was going to end up leaving on the epoxy resin. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be once I got it all cleaned up. And I'm just looking over the finish, just make sure everything else is okay. Yeah, here, this was another error on my end. Hopefully it's something I can pass along. So I was on a forum talking to some guys, and one guy was telling me that one of the greatest things in sliced bread is this boiled linseed oil, polymerized linseed oil, and putting lacquer over the top. Now, I really, honestly, what I should have done was I should have practiced it on a scrap piece. I almost always practice everything on a scrap piece. But this guy was rooting and tooting this stuff up so much that I didn't think that there was any way that this guy didn't know what he was talking about. But it didn't go very well. Now, the sides, I didn't have any defects on, but you'll see a little bit later on in the video that it didn't work very well for me. So maybe he was talking about something else, or maybe he was trolling or something, but it just didn't work out. Anyways, I just took a clear solo cup, and I let that boiled linseed oil end up evaporating and curing. Here I'm just looking this over, making sure that everything is set up and there's no debris or lint or anything. There you can see where that wax paper ended up transferring into that epoxy resin. Now, I'm more concerned about the front on this piece. There's going to be light that comes through this piece, and that I want to have the transparency, but I want it to look clean. So I'm not as worried about the back side as I am about the front. So my goal for this piece is that I want the light to be able to travel through the back side and still look clean through the front. Now, if I was really concerned about this back side, I would end up going with a remix of the epoxy resin, probably brushed it on here to give it an even look. But I just wanted to fill in that transfer from the wax paper, so I decided I was going to spray it with lacquer. I figured I was going to try to save myself a little bit of time as well, and then just give it a quick sealing over the backside. because again, the backside wasn't my primary concern for this piece. So here is where I end up going over the boil linseed oil with the lacquer. Now, something that's pretty strange though is that the sides didn't have any defects from there. So I think what happened with that is that the boil linseed oil actually absorbed more into those end grains, and there wasn't quite as much remaining on the surface. So that's why it didn't defect on the side pieces as much as it did on the top. I'm just kind of looking this over now, making sure that the light's traveling through it, checking the color, just making sure that there's good clarity. And it looks pretty good, for the purposes that I'm going for. I think it turned out pretty decent. And given that I haven't done this in quite a while, not since working with epoxy resin in high school, and coloring it is something that I didn't do very often. So it's been a good learning lesson all the way around. Now you'll be able to see that there is some orange peeling, and that's what I was saying, that if I wanted it to look a little cleaner, now I could have probably worked some magic doing a little bit of sanding, maybe a second coat with the lacquer, but if I really wanted it to look nice, I would have went over it with the epoxy resin again. Now there's the defects that I was talking about, the fisheyes, and I think what happened is that the cross linkers in the lacquer, they got interfered with by that oil base. So I think what happened was that the cross linkers didn't, it didn't have the opportunity to bind together. So when it was trying to cross link together in the lacquer to lacquer molecule, that it was running across that boiled linseed oil. So it kind of prevented that from traveling together and linking together. So I started sanding it with a 220 grit. I switched over to the 150 because I wanted to remove more material faster. I'm just removing the top part, and I want it to be a little more gentle because I was thinking, well, this is a good opportunity where I can kind of pop the grain. I was thinking even maybe adding a secondary color where I could put like a nice blue over the top, a deep blue coloring, and it would have worked out really nice because that black would have already been sealed. So I don't know, I guess I decided against it, and I really wanted it to have that grayish look to it. I put back the 220 grit back on my dual action, run over it just to smooth it out. I also wanted it to be a finer grit so that way the black doesn't penetrate quite as much, especially since this is sat overnight now. It's going to be even a little more concentrated. Then I'll just be putting the one coat over this. Just remove the excess and hitting it with that cloth. That's the cloth that I actually cut a piece off to end up applying the dye stain. I just hit it with that cloth also to try to help it dry a little bit faster, because I wanted to end up hitting it with the lacquer yet still in the same day. Now that's the backside. I'm just taking the 220 grit because it wasn't sealed with the lacquer. It just had the boiled linseed oil on there. So I just hit it with the 220 grit, and I did a little bit of an experiment. I wanted to see what it would end up looking like if I didn't apply any other sealer over that once I sanded it back. I kind of liked the look, and it was on the bottom side, so I wasn't really too concerned over it. I thought it'd be a good place to do a little experiment with. So again, I'm just taking that water, I'm applying it on the surface just to kind of see what it would end up looking like with the sealer. I bring the light over to try to get a better look at it. I decided I kind of like it, and I'm going to end up wiping off that excess water. And I'm going to let it dry out, and then I'll end up sealing it. Now this is fully dried out. It's just giving it another good wipe down, just to make sure that there's no debris on there. Getting it ready for the sealer. Again, I'm just taking the gloss lacquer, going over the whole piece again. Trying to just give a better view here, but here is where it's dried out. And I like it. It's got the nice gray looks to it, where it still has the black deep grain color patterning. It's exactly what I was looking for. So I'm just going to hit this with the sealer. The same thing, the gloss lacquer. I just thought that was pretty interesting. I mean, I could have ended up putting down another coat of the black over the top of it, ended up with that nice gray kind of look to it as well, but I don't know. I just, for some reason, I just wanted to kind of see what it would end up looking like, and it was going to be on the bottom of the piece, so it wasn't that big of a deal, and I just wanted to see what it would look like. Alright, so here again, I'm just cutting a strip off of the cotton cloth, and I'm grabbing mineral spirits, and I'm just going to give the epoxy resin in the front surface a good wipe down. Just cleaning things up just to make sure that there's no debris or anything on there. And just kind of giving it a overall cleaning and just seeing what it looks like. I'm fitting the top mount piece to the base just because I was kind of concerned with having so much lacquer and coating that I was going to end up having a loose fit, but it actually fit perfect. It's actually a really nice tight friction fit. I didn't even have to glue it, so that piece I didn't even glue. I just left it because it was a really nice tight friction fit. Snaps in nice. Good fit. Again, I'm just kind of trying to clean it up a little, just buffing it a little bit with that rag. You can almost burnish that epoxy resin as well. Like if I really wanted to end up, I guess, buffing it out a little bit more, then I could have actually did a burnishing process with that cotton cloth and probably with the mineral spirits, and I could have got it a little more transparent and cleaner as well. But anyway, so this is just kind of giving an overall look, just trying to show what it looks like. I put it into the light to try to get a better visual. A lot of times what I end up seeing, it doesn't transfer and relate to the camera. But this is a pretty good look, what it really looks like. The base does. It's really what I was going for. I wanted that lighter gray coloring with the darker patterning. The resin was nice and transparent. It looks nice and clean with the light transfer through it. It gives good bright coloring. So I really hope that this was something that helped out. that my mistakes are something that you guys can end up learning from, and I hope it was informational. And thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Sorry it went so long, but I really hope that it was helpful. Thanks.